Thank you for tuning in. This is MP5. I'm your host, Jordan Wendelken, and we're at the 5-Star Conference in Dallas, Evolve 5-Star Conference, and I am joined here with Kellie Chambers. She's the EVP of MSI. Thanks for joining us. How are you today?
So good. Thank you for having me
Excellent.
today.
Is this your first 5-Star Conference?
It is not my first 5-Star Conference, though I've been away for a few years.
Okay, well, how many 5-Star Conferences have you been to?
I believe I attended 3 in the past.
Okay. And you've been in property preservation for how long?
I joined property preservation industry in 2001 and spent a good 20 years in the field property preservation space.
Excellent. So not speaking for everybody, but at least for myself, I'm fairly new to property preservation. However, there's so much to it that goes deeper than I feel a lot of people even understand and know. Do you find yourself having to educate even, let's say, your friends who don't know what you do about what you do?
Goodness, yes. My entire career, I have been explaining to people what property preservation is. It's very not well understood.
Right.
I talked to my parents, who are definitely a generation ahead of us, and they've never missed a mortgage payment. And so when I said I was coming to property preservation, they're like, that doesn't make sense. Everybody makes their mortgage. I said, no, Dad, it doesn't. And this is what happens when you don't, and we have to preserve the asset. And so I feel like I've been sharing that same story for many, many years with family, friends, colleagues.
How does that conversation usually go?
I think there's a lot of shock and surprise and surprise about property preservation and the fact that there's vacant, abandoned properties out there that are generally, in good condition and being preserved until the new homeowner comes in. And there's certainly a lot of misconceptions about the vacant properties, and banks. There seems to be a perception that the blight is caused by the banks, and it's not caused by just the environment and the economics that the country's been going through for a few years.
Now, do you work nationwide?
Yes, MSI is a national field service provider, so we're taking care of properties in all of the 50 states and Guam and Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow. Let's talk about some facts then, since you're the source for this, I feel. Are we seeing certain areas of the United States it's certainly different across the board as far as property preservation is concerned, defaults, so on and so forth? I
think the defaults tend to follow the economic conditions in those states, and I'm certainly not an economist, but as you see that, states with harder hit economies and higher unemployment rates are just generally going to have higher delinquencies and foreclosure. So that's just the ebb and flow of the economics of it all. And of course, the elephant in the room being the pandemic and what that's done to property preservation. Boosted it? A lot? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
We haven't seen that, at least at MSI. We haven't seen where there's a higher rate of delinquencies or foreclosures. In fact, I think the industry is facing 40 or 45-year lows of foreclosures and delinquencies right now. So kind of the opposite. I think the biggest impact during the COVID was the staffing shortages. So just like there's staffing shortages in the restaurant industry and every industry out there, construction, whatever have you, there's also staffing shortages with the field vendors actually preserving the assets. The guys putting on the new roofs and turning on the electricity and make sure the basements don't flood. So that's been certainly a much larger challenge in recent years than it ever was during the boom of, the 2006, 2012 era. Certainly.
Well, that makes sense. So what do you think the future is looking like then for let's before we get into Guam and so on, what's that looking like in your neck of the woods?
I think in property preservation, we're going to see a trend that just started to emerge with increasing allowables. Fannie and Freddie have come out with increased allowables. All the insurers are coming out with increased efforts for outreach, borrower outreach, and loss mitigation. So I think that those allowables are going to translate to better property condition should the property go all the way through the foreclosure process and make it into the hands of a new homeowner. And I think that's very promising. When I started in 2001, we weren't even doing interior inspections, so we didn't even know if the basement was flooded. And here we are in 2022, interior inspections have been the standard for a dozen years or so, but more importantly, you see a bigger shift to actually rehabbing these properties with the intention of moving a new homeowner inside.
Okay. That's definitely interesting. And again, I can't help but think of the misconceptions that come with the property preservation realm and just assuming, foreclosures and so on. And just because I know what the housing crisis, you look at these just full neighborhoods just totally abandoned, and they just beautiful homes just over time totally deteriorated, so on and so forth. But it's not really like that.
It's really not. Back in 2001 and probably before I joined the industry, there was a lot. I feel like the regulations were less with borrower outreach and active, aggressive foreclosures following the timelines and the rules. HUD and the other investors certainly have very clearly defined the timelines and the notice of default when it needs to occur and when you've got to do all the legal things that I don't do. And so that has sped up the process and reduced the length of vacancy. So if you can reduce the length of vacancy, you preserve the asset better, and then the next homeowner is going to have a higher chance of success because they're not repairing the property as much as they were doing maybe 20 years ago when they bought a foreclosure.
Right, because you just don't know.
Right. I mean, back then you weren't even going inside, and so you might be buying a property with a flooded basement.
Sure. So then what you're saying is that with what we've learned, the government's regulatory involvement has actually impacted positively in the space.
Absolutely. I think the government involvement and the regulations and the streamlined legal processes that I'm not qualified to talk about, but the streamlined legal processes in terms of servicing the loan, and then also the technology that banks have deployed for that borrower engagement and the education on loss mitigation and workout plans has absolutely preserved the housing stock much better than it did 20 years ago.
So what ends up being kind of a bottleneck for property preservation on average?
That's a very good question. I think in today's world, the real environment today is probably the staffing shortage with the field vendors. That's a real thing. The increase in inflation with gas prices and material and supply chain delays is also a bottleneck right now. Vendors are shrinking their coverage areas, and it's just taking longer to get the equipment and the parts and the tools necessary to repair the properties and keep them safe and secure. So I think that's probably a very recent challenge.
Sure.
I think longer term, the biggest bottleneck is probably, or not a bottleneck, but an opportunity to have the investors have more commonality with the property preservation rules. The investors have a lot of commonality with the loss mitigation steps and processes and borrower outreach and the foreclosure process, but they haven't really taken it to property preservation. So we're seeing right now one investor is really big on rehabbing and kind of flipping a property in REO so that a homeowner is attracted to purchase it. Not all of the investors are there yet. So it would be nice to see more streamlined so that the community that gets maybe one FHA property in foreclosure and a VA and a Freddie Mac and a Fannie Mae, they get one experience versus 4 different experiences today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being on the topic of 5-Star Conference, what are some of the things that you attend and partake in 5-Star Conference? Kind of the highlights. What are the things that you look for when you come to 5-Star?
Yeah, definitely the educational labs, because everybody does bring a different perspective.
And it's changing so much.
Yes, it is changing, evolving. Just like this year's theme. It is 5-Star does a great job of ensuring that all of the voices are at the table on these panels. So it's not just a panel of servicers, or you don't see a lot of panels of just the investors. 5-Star does a fantastic job of bringing every party to the table and in the discussion. So you learn a lot from hearing other people's perspectives.
And you were sitting on one of the panels, correct?
Yes, I'll be moderating the Property Preservation Lab tomorrow morning.
Excellent. What any key takeaways for those who are attending to focus on?
We're focusing on property preservation challenges as well as just best practices. So I think that it'll be an entertaining panel because we have very tenured, seasoned participants on the panel. So it'll be a good discussion.
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. So Kellie Chambers here. This is MP5. I'm your host, Jordan Wendelken, and we are at the 5-Star Conference 22 Evolve. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. MP5 is a resource for industry information. I hope you liked what you've been watching so far. If you have any questions, please reach out to events@the5star.com. Like, follow, and subscribe both YouTube and LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of our news and releases.